G'day and welcome to Not the Farmer's Wife podcast. I'm CJ Steedman and I'm not the farmer's wife, I'm the farmer. I'm also a mum to E and OJ and a full-time off-farm worker. And like most farmers, I'm able to farm with the help of my family and my partner, who I call the handy helper. On Mojo Homestead, we grow chickens, goats, cows and bees, and we do it using regenerative agriculture and holistic management practices. If, like me, you love all things farming and homesteading, then we'd love to have you along for the ride. So let's get farming. G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of Not the Farmer's Wife. Recording on my own today. The handy helper has got some chores that he's doing around the farm, so I've sent him on his way to do those. But also too, we have set up a different background here. As you can see, my desk has moved and I am now facing a different direction in our lounge room. We live in a tiny house. So for those that don't know, it's literally, we're probably about the size of most people's lounge, living, dining, kitchen areas is our entire house. So we have to be very conservative with how we set things up. And we've managed to move my desk over into a corner that previously housed a budgie that we no longer have. And so I'm kind of sitting in the corner of the lounge room now, which is good too because it's Christmas time and we just set up the Christmas tree. So the Christmas tree was set up where my desk was. So recording again on video for those listening on podcasts. So hello to anybody on YouTube. And we're talking today about brooder to tractor. So in that meat process, in that meat chicken growing process, what we need to be thinking about as far as from brooder to tractor in a bit more detail. And the main point of what you need to be doing is, that's probably a bad way of wording it. The main thing you need to think about is if you are starting to grow meat birds for yourself, growing them from day olds is by far the most efficient and cheapest way to do it. And so to do that, you have to start with having them as day olds in a brooder house. So I have got a couple of images here. I'm going to try and see if I can share my screen for a second and show you, and it's just started raining again outside, show you this is our heat plate that we're actually looking at stocking these on Amazon because I have a store on Amazon and I'm looking at stocking these. I got a hold of these from a guy in China. Everything's made in China, so there's no point trying to get an Australian made one. But this one is particularly good. I really like it. The heat plate underneath is not too hot to touch. And I just wanted to show you our kind of brooder setup. And I don't have a long shot of it, but this is probably a good way of looking at it as far as how we had it set up before we had our heat plates. So you can see there's a big globe lamp that sits over the top of the chickens. We had chickens separated by age, so we had some that were different ages. So we had just a timber board between the two, separating them. And these feeders, the handy helper made these up. These feeders are awesome. They're just PVC pipe, and he just literally drilled like a door handle kind of drill, the drill bits you get with the door handle thing. He just literally drilled a cutout hole out of them, and the food goes down. We fill it up from the top and it filters down and we just push it along at the bottom, and you can see there's 3 little holes there, so the chicks can all, no, they're not rushed to kind of eat. They can all eat at their own leisure and get their head in without putting their feet in, which is a really important thing about a brooder house. You need to make it sure it's clean, and chicks will stand in their own, and they'll stand in their food, they'll kick manure into their food, they'll shit in their food, they'll do all that kind of stuff. So that's the other side brooder, which I think they had the heat pad in there. Yeah, they had the heat pad in there, and we just have these little water containers, and we only use the small water containers because we're checking them every day. I do want to get a drip feed system out there because I think a drip feed system is going to be cleaner. This one you have to clean all the time because they do try and stand in it. But you can see there we've got it raised up on a brick, and the reason that we raised it up on a brick is so that they can't really get their feet into it, and it kind of, they're going over to it and drinking just with their head bobbing into it rather than their feet. So I'll just get back out of there and go back to not sharing if I can do that. I'm trying to work out how I do that now. Stop share. There we go. Back to normal. All right. So what do you need to be thinking about as far as brooder houses go? Well, I'm clearing my screen because I've got a list of notes here and I just want to make sure I cover off on all of it. So the brooder house has to be warm It has to be dry. It has to have food and water in it. It has to have a source of bedding. Now you can see in those photos that I showed you, we had pine shavings that we use. We don't use cedar or anything that's been treated or stained or anything like that, just the pine shavings. And we use a deep fill method. So you notice probably in those photos that the fill wasn't very deep on the bottom. That's because they were only a couple of days old at that point. I think they were a week old. We just keep topping up. So in that first week, we kind of clean it out once or twice. And then from there on in, we start topping up by just laying a thin layer over the top of what we've already got. And the reason we do that is because there's no point cleaning it out when they're only going to be in there for 3 to 4, 5, 6 weeks tops. And we can just deep fill over the top of it to keep the manure smell down, the urine smell, the poop smell, all that stuff down. And then at the end, when they move out, then we do a big cleanup and we go in and we shovel all the shit out, literally shovel all the shit out, get it out, and it goes into my compost pile. So it all goes for breaking down in the compost. And it's really good compost with the pine shavings and the manure mixed in with it and some feed and water and things like that mixed in. It makes really good compost. So we clean it out and then we usually disinfect the surface, the bottom surface. And that's just so that it stays clean in between uses. At the moment, we've got 4 hens out in our brooder house because they're not quite ready to go in with the roosters yet. So they're in the brooder house, but they're not on heat. So they only have wood shavings, the pine shavings down the back end, and they don't have any heat source. They've just got food and water in there. So what else do you need? The main thing is that you need to keep it clean. Now, when I say clean, a deep fill method is still fine because with the deep fill method, what you're doing is you're just putting a layer over the top of what they've already soiled, wherever they've pooped, you're just putting a layer over the top of that. And I just find it's more efficient to do it that way than to clean it out every time. And when you're cleaning it, you're disrupting the birds. You're having to move them out to clean it all out and then put new fill in. And it's just not very practical. So I do it that way. But you can't have them standing in manure. You can't have them standing in wet, soggy, shit on pine shavings. It's just not healthy for them. It's not good for their feet. It's not good for their respiratory systems. It's just not good overall. So long as you keep that layer going, and the best way, I say it to the kids when they come and help me, is if they can smell chicken poop, then we need to put more bedding down because you should never be able to smell it when you go in there. So the heat source is probably the big one. It's the one that most people freak out about. And that's because at the end of the day, you have to have a heat source until they are feathered. Until they have grown enough feathers to go out into the wild world, they need a heat source because that's what their mother would be providing. Now, in the past, we used to have lizards and we had a lizard lamp that we had, and we had a feather duster around the lizard lamp so the chicks felt like they were standing under a mother. But honestly, these brooder plates that we're looking at stocking, they are the best things ever. You can't burn yourself touching them. The chicks can't burn themselves. They don't have a spark or anything that will catch on fire. So there's no fire risk. And they honestly draw very little power. We're off grid completely here, and using the plates just does not impact the power. The handy helper was setting up a system where the lights and the power, the heat source, were coming off just a small solar panel and a battery that looked after itself. So it wasn't even drawing off the house power. Now you do need to have a light source in there, and the light source needs to be something that you can turn on and off. So if it's a closed house, you want to be able to regulate light for 12 hours a day if it's summertime, so that the chicks get used to that day-night pattern, and it helps with their rhythm as far as sleep and active cycles. So we had an infrared light in there at one point, but we now just have, I think they're LED lights. They're so cheap and easy to run, and they're on a timer, and they just come on at like 6 o'clock in the morning and they go off at 6 o'clock at night, and that gives the chicks the light that they need during the day. Now, what kind of problems can you have with it? The main problem is dirt and yuck in there. And if they're not clean, then they'll chicks, they're filthy little creatures. They shit everywhere. As you can see in those photos I showed you, the brooder plate had shit all over the top of it. The design that we're looking at doing actually has like a TP design on the top of the brooder plate. So the chicks can't climb up on there and shit on top of the brooder because it just makes such a mess. And you have to go in there and scrape it all off. Now, what happens? How long do you keep them in there? So you're feeding them your chick starter. You've got your brooder plate. They've got fresh water. They've got good, lovely bedding. They've got light going on and off 12 hours a day. And at what point do you move them out? Well, you have to wait till they're feathered. So for the meat birds like cobs and what are the other ones? Cornish crosses, our really fast growing meat birds, around the 3 week mark, you're going to have fully feathered birds. So around that 3 week mark, you're going to want to start. And what we have is out the side of our brooder house, we have a fenced, caged area that we allow the chicks to go to for usually about 7 days during the daytime only. We close it off overnight, just in that transition period before they go out into the pasture. And that's just to try and help them acclimatise to the weather that they're going to be dealing with outside. It's not covered across the top completely. So if it rains, the chicks have to work out, oh, it's raining. Do we go back into our brooder house or do we stay in the rain or, that kind of thing. So it really does acclimatise them for that proper out on the pasture. For heritage breeds, you're probably going to have to wait till about the 6 week mark. In the photos that I showed you, I think that they were probably a week or two old. And so they had wing feathers, but they still had their downy fluff underneath and on their backs. And that downy fluff is not weather resistant. And that's why mum chicks still sit on the babies to keep them warm, because they're not weather resistant at that point. Once they're fully feathered, then they have this oil that secretes into their feathers and it gives them some layer of protection against rain and wind and things like that. So, chicken tractor. Now, I was going to show you as this one as well, and I'll go back to sharing my photos. So, there's more of them. As you can see, the poop on the plate, top of the plate. So, I'm going to have different kind of housing going over that. Now, my chicken tractors. Oh, they might be back up here. No, they're down. Sorry. Chicken tractors. I have lost them. How have I lost them? So our chicken tractors were built. There we go. There's a video one. I don't want the video because the noise will come over the top and you won't be able to see it. And I have completely lost it. I don't know why. It's vanished there. All right. I'll try and turn the sound down and we'll see how we go with this. This is our chicken tractor. So this was something that the Handy Helper built for us. It's 3 meters by 3 meters. And you can see in there's a water container hanging from the roof. There's a PVC feeder chute over to one side. It's half closed in solid to get it away from the weather, and half of it is mesh. And it moves. So we have a chain at the front of it and we move it across the grass as we want to use it. I'll go back out of my stop share there for you. So we put the birds into that when we move them out onto pasture, and then we literally move it every day, one length, so 3 meters across the paddock, and we check the water and the feed, and the animals live in there. Now, meat birds, particularly if you're raising Cornish cobs and things like that, they don't need to roost. In fact, they won't roost. We tried it, we put roost perches in there for them and they just don't use it. So your heritage birds might as they get older, but the younger meat birds definitely won't. They never get to that point. And so they just literally lay on the ground and go to sleep cuddled up next to each other. And they did. We went out there and checked a few times to start with overnight, and they would just huddle up to keep each other warm, and they'd live in there. Now, while they're living in there, they're just moving across the grass each day. They're having an extra kind of fresh piece of grass, and they're eating bugs, they're eating grass, they're eating grubs out of the ground. Any protein sources like mice or rats or anything that come near them are dead, gone. They love them. And that's a great thing. It's nature working at its best. Chickens are omnivores and they will eat everything in their path. We also put feed in there, and the feed goes in through the chute, and that's grower pellets at that point. Once they're out on the pasture, there are grower pellets, not chick starter. So the idea behind the chicken tractor is that because they're moving each day, their manure is dropping onto the grass, and then within 24 hours, you're moving them off their own manure. The joy of this, the great thing of this, is like strip grazing for cattle. Because you're moving them each day, they are never eating in their own feces on a regular basis, which means you don't have to stress as much about parasite loads. And at the end of the day, if you are doing this for health purposes, then you want your chickens to not have to have as many additives in their diet, not having to worm them as much, not having to vaccinate and all that kind of thing. it's going to end up with a really nice quality meat. So you really want to keep parasite loads down, but you don't want to have to be continually worming to do that. Now with our egg layers, because they stay for a bit longer, they stay a week on grass, we do have to worm them from time to time. And because there's so many of them living together, they do get wormed. And we do that based on when we think they need worming, we don't have a schedule where it's every 3 months on the button they get wormed. But with meat birds, if you're moving them each day, you really never have to get to that point of the parasite load being an issue. So that's the joy of having them in those chicken tractors. Now, if you don't have a tractor set up, so that was a 3 metre by 3 metre job. I think Handy Helper told us last week that he spent about $20, and that was mostly on screws and things that he couldn't find because most of what he used for that chicken tractor was scrap. So it was cheap to build because we had access to scrap. If you don't have access to scrap, you might be looking at $50, $100 worth of timber, wire, sheet metal. But I would encourage you to go to any local green shed that you've got, we call them green sheds here in Australia, where you can pick up secondhand supplies. Because we sometimes go there and we get mesh for our veggie garden, and we get things like chicken wire that's the equivalent of chicken wire, but it might be panels of mesh, panels of sheet metal that are only in small sizes. And let's face it, we didn't need a lot. I mean, the cage is only about 50 centimetres high. So to wall around the back of we didn't need big sheets. The timber that we used, the latches that we used, all that they're all secondhand. We didn't buy new. I mean, the chickens don't care if it's new. It may not look as pretty, but it's very functional, and that's all we really needed it for. So if you can't do a chicken tractor or you don't want to do a chicken tractor, the alternative is to use electric fencing, like chicken electric fencing, same as what you would use for layers that you might have in a paddock environment. Now, the important thing with that is, and I say this from experience, really bad experience, if you have other animals in around the chickens that can get tangled in the fence, you have to ensure that the electric fence is working and that it is ramped up as high as it can be. And yes, that means making sure you turn it off before you climb in to do any feeding or watering. But we have lost a goat to being tangled in the fence, and she choked before we could get to we were out, and we didn't realise, and she'd got tangled in the fence and got herself so wound up that she couldn't breathe, and we got home and she was already gone. So I now don't leave goats in the paddock with the chickens if we're going out. They're only in there if we're home. If we're going out, they're out in the big paddock. And that's because I just can't risk coming home to find that again. So if you have other animals, dogs, cats, things like that, then certainly be aware that they can get tangled in the fence. If the electrics are on and up nice and high, I have still seen goats go up and touch the fence continuously because it doesn't impact them. So the electrics have got to be up really high for it to be functional for goats. And certainly our cows are Millie and Molly can be a little dumb at times, and they have walked up and literally just walked over the fence to get into the chicken yard. So the electric fence obviously didn't work on their skin either. But if you want to build one, what I might do is through the week, I will get the Handy Helper to maybe measure out something, and I'll post something showing what his plans were. It was a very simple plan, and I would encourage you, if you're interested in this long term, there is a book by Joel Salatin that is all about building those kind of structures, chicken tractors for meat, chicken tractors for egg layers, things like that. And we ended up buying that book because it just was so helpful to have a diagram of everything and how to space it out and where you needed to put things. And it helped us think about the things that we hadn't thought about. Now, what are the big mistakes that people make when it comes to putting chickens out into a chicken tractor for meat birds? Probably the biggest one is not having enough space. So cramming too many birds into a small space. That 3 metre by 3 metre we used for 20 birds at a time, and that was adequate. 20 birds, when they were in their big growth spurts, we sometimes moved it every 12 hours instead of every 24 hours. But they definitely had enough space to move, enough space to cuddle up and stay warm, enough space so that they could all get to the feeder and the water without fights. So that 3 metre by 3 metre for us was a really good size. And I think, 9 foot by 9 foot roughly. So yeah, it was a good size for us. I know Joel Salton talks about 12 foot by 9 foot. So he goes a bit bigger. And he has a lot of birds in there. He talks about having 70 birds in there. I haven't gone that far, haven't used it for that many birds, but one day we'll get there. And we may have to, instead of using timber like we used on our one, we may have to look at using like the PVC piping, which is what tends to recommend is that lighter weight, because then it's easier to move it. Overfeeding and underfeeding is another one that can cause issues. So overfeeding is a real issue when it comes to Cornish crosses and cobs and things like that. And it's more of an issue when they're in the brooder house before they come out onto the tractor. And the reason for that is that these hybrid birds are built to, they're bred to grow super, super quick, super fast. And sometimes their heart can't handle it. And if they grow too quickly, so if they get more food than what they actually need, they can end up having a heart attack around that 3-week mark. And we did discuss that last week, I think. So it's really important that in that first 3-week mark, you measure out food. I think I'll have to work out exactly what it was, but it was like we're only putting in like 4 or 5 cups a day for 20 birds. I think it was about that. It was only one PVC pipe chute that we were doing it. So that's all we were feeding them per day. Now, they would chow down on that, but we wouldn't go and refeed. If they ate that all, then that's all they got. Once they go out onto the chicken tractor, then it's different. Then you can give them a little bit more. But the other issue too is you don't want to be starving them because they just won't grow. So if you're putting food in and you're finding, you go out in the first couple of days, I always recommend checking regularly. If you go out and check and it is completely empty and there's no food left, then you may need to reconsider how much you're feeding. You might need to up it by a third or something like that and see how you go. Same with them out in the paddock. When they first go out into the paddock, just be mindful that they'll be exposed to grass and bugs and things like that, which they will love and they will scoff and eat. And that may mean that they're not eating as much of their food. And you think, oh, they're not eating as much, so I can back off a little bit on the food. But then on days where there's not a lot of bugs and not a lot of grass that they're eating, they might need more food. So you really do have to play it by ear. Now, the other thing too is ensuring that they have good quality food. So you really want to make sure that they do have those grower pellets. It's really important for chickens, and I say it all the time. People give layer birds scratch mix, and I call that chicken candy. Layer pellets have every nutritional requirement that the laying chicken needs, and it is, I'm sure people will go, oh, no, I'd rather make up my own food. If you've got the time to do that, go for it. Go hell for leather. Have it all. But for me, buying bags of layer pellets is easier because I know that they're getting the nutritional requirements and I don't have to sit there and calculate how much corn and how much this and blend it and make sure that I've got everything going right. So grower pellets is definitely the way to go. And now the last big mistake that people make is not moving the tractor often enough. You really need to move that tractor. It gives them that fresh, beautiful grass and bugs. But the main thing is that you are reducing the parasite load on the birds. When you move it off the manure that they've been on, they're not standing in their own shit. Ethically it's better, health-wise it's better, nutritionally it's amazing for them. And like I said, there were times when our birds were eating so much so quick that we were actually moving them every 12 hours. And I think you just have to play it by ear. It depends how much grass you've got. I mean, that photo I showed, the ground was very dry at that point. We were coming into summer and the ground was a bit dry, a bit brown. We didn't have a lot of green grass. At the moment, it's absolutely pissing down rain out here at the moment, and all of our grass has bounced back up. So the chickens will be going crazy for the next couple of days because they'll have beautiful lush grass and probably a lot of bugs to go with it as well. Now, feeding. When you feed them, what difference is it going to make to the meat of the bird? And we touched on this last week. It's really important to understand that chickens that are fed a pasture-raised diet, where they've got grass, bugs, all that kind of thing, as well as the pellets that you're giving them for the nutritional requirements, because of that diverse diet that they then have as pasture-raised chickens, the meat is always going to taste better. And I say it tastes meatier. Some people may not like that. Some people might be, oh, it's a bit too much, a bit too chickeny. But we really enjoyed it. When we compared our Cornish cobs to our heritage, we found that meat much better. But across the board, the meat tasted better than what we buy in the shops. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't buy meat from the shops still. We still buy meat from the shops. There are times when I run into the shops and buy a barbecue chook that's already cooked because I'm running late and Costco does chickens for $6.99. And if I'm in a mad rush and having a hell week, that's exactly what my go-to is. So we still do eat chickens that have been commercially reared, and we still notice the taste, the difference between our chickens and those ones. The other meat is bland. It's the only way to describe it. So it's a really good thing to trial run and see how you go with that and see what you think of the taste. Now, raising chickens without breaking the bank. You just have to excuse me. I'm on a different chair today and I'm uncomfortable. It's rock hard, this chair, and I'm thinking I might have to change it. I've just had my knee surgery and I'm still trying to get a bend back into my knee in the right spot. So a couple of things you can do for cutting down costs. Obviously, buying day olds is going to be much cheaper than buying anything that's a little bit older. So straight up, that's a cost saving. Having a pastured area that you can put them straight out onto, like we did, and having our chicken tractor, having our chicken tractor that we built ourselves was a cost saver as well. But the main cost you're going to have is food, is growing pellets. And the best suggestion I have there is if you're only doing this as a trial run and it's your first time, you just have to bite the bullet and buy the bags. Now, the bags are about $20 each. I think $22 if you get the really good quality ones. $20 for a 20-kilo bag. So $1 a kilo. If you're doing that to start with, that's going to be your cheapest way of doing it in the beginning. Once we got going with it, I did say to the handy helper, my next big thing is to install a feed silo. So one of those big plastic tubs that has a little feeder chute that comes out, and we will buy a ton of chicken feed at a time rather than buying bags of chicken feed at a time. Obviously, that's when you are getting into that more commercial level of feeding. But there's other things you can do if you are trying to really keep the costs down on what you're feeding them. There are other things you can do. And these are a couple of things that I did. I went round to the local supermarkets, like the little ones, like IGA and stuff like that, and said to them, when you throw out your vegetable scraps, like when you have lettuce leaves, cauliflower leaves, celery that doesn't sell, that is going to get turfed out, can I come and collect it? And they were like, yeah, I guess. Handed it over to me. So I was bringing home, literally, I had a garbage bag in the back of a garbage bin, plastic garbage tub in the back of the car, and I would put it in there and put the lid on so I didn't have to put up the smell in the car of slightly rotting vegetables. And I would get home and go and tip it into their yard. They would go nuts for it. They absolutely loved it. Now, the other thing was when we were living in Gunning, one of the local takeaways there, she was awesome. She had a scrap bucket that she kept that was all organic matter. So anything that wasn't napkins, any cutlery things, any wrappers of things or lids of bottles or stuff like that, anything that was organic scrap matter, she would put into a bucket. I used to go down there every other day and pick up the bucket and take it back to the chickens and tip it into their yard. It took me 5 to 10 minutes, but oh my God, it gave them such a boost in their diet. Layer pellets are great, grower pellets are fantastic, but at the end of the day, having that fresh veggies that they can kind of forage and really express themselves as chickens with is so much better for them. So if you can do that, if you have a local shop or a local takeaway or restaurant that you can collect organic matter off, or even if it's just saying to your neighbours, hey, I've got chickens. If you've got lettuce scraps or fruit and veg scraps that are really greeny kind of scraps that you're not maybe putting into your compost, chuck them in a bucket. Go and buy a bucket from Bunnings. It costs you $20 for a food grade bucket with a lid. And that's what I did with the takeaway. I supplied them with the bucket. I had 2 buckets. I would drop the fresh, clean one down there, pick up the one that was full. And when I brought the old one back cleaned, ready to go again, I'd pick up the next one. And it worked great. So that's a really good way that you can save the money on that. Now, I've got a couple of things here that I had on my list. I'm just having a look. The health benefits of raised chickens. I think if you're listening to this podcast, I probably don't need to sell you on the health benefits of pasture-raised chickens. They have a more varied diet. They have a better lifestyle. So ethically, we're straight away better off. But as I said, the meat taste is so much different to what you get in the shops that if you're looking for a health perspective on doing this, if you're not sure about, I don't know whether I can cull chickens and cull my own chickens that I've raised. You really have to talk yourself into it via the health aspect, because having chickens that you know everything that's gone into their body, it's for me, it was a no-brainer. I mean, I have no problem culling chickens. I have no problem culling any animals that are going to be consumed for us, because in my mind, I always look at it that the best thing I can do is be really respectful of the animal, treat it really well, and then when I cull it and use it for food, which is what it's designed for, I don't have a problem with that. But if you do have a problem with that, if you think that's going to be a sticking point for you, really sit down and think about whether or not you want to be feeding your family really healthy, unadulterated is probably the best way to put it, meat. And of course, obviously, there's the environmental impact. I think, I forget the name of the movie. Was it the guy that did the Super Size Me? He did the chicken movie as well, where he went and calling Zerlock or something like that, his name was. He went and did a chicken movie about how commercial chickens are raised, and it's pretty horrific. I get that they're feeding the masses, and no hate on them, because at the end of the day, it's the same situation as with, say, pasteurized dairy, where we're feeding the masses. We have to make sure that we're pumping out the right amount of milk and it's listeria free. So I totally understand where they're coming from in doing that big commercial production. But if you're somebody like me who wants to take control of your food source and you want the healthiest and best option for your food source, then environmentally, not having commercially raised chicken meat is the win for the environment. And I've said it before on this podcast, I am not, probably fall into the almost climate change denier category, because I really look at the climate that I've dealt with for the last 40 years being on property, and realize that the climate changes. It's cyclical. We have drought seasons, we have wet seasons. Anything that we've done to it doesn't, in my last 40 years, I haven't seen any major change. So if you're somebody who believes in climate change, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I haven't had the evidence presented to me that makes me confident that there is an issue with climate change. But that being said, there is absolutely an issue with pollution, and there's absolutely an issue with waste and humans not using the resources they have correctly. I have no problem saying that. And I think that raising your own chickens definitely gets you across the line as far as doing the right thing for your environment. Now, buying your day olds. So we did talk, I think, a bit last week about going to different hatcheries that are available. We've used up in Sydney, but there are plenty available. There's absolutely heaps. And if you're thinking of only doing this as a trial run, what I would say to you is put the feelers out and see if anybody has any excess roosters. You would be surprised how many people post on Facebook or Gumtree or places like that and say, I have roosters, excess to requirements, and I live in town and I can't keep them. I don't know what to do with them. Now, I have had some people say to me, oh, I have roosters, but if I give them to you, I don't want them going in the pot. Which I always kind of go, well, that once I take them, it's kind of up to me what I do with them. That being said, I've got 2 Brahmas outside that were actually meant to be going in the pot and never went to the pot. I think people have to be realistic if they've raised roosters. And certainly the young lady who gave me the 2 Brahmins, she said, don't tell me if you put them in the pot. I know you probably will, and that's okay, but just don't tell me. And that's fine too. I've got no problem with that. I know she was attached to them. Luckily for them, that neither of them ended up in the pot. But she has given us roosters in the past, and we have put them in the pot. Now, some people get really hung up about it, but if they've got excess roosters and you're doing them the favour of taking the roosters off their hands, they probably just need to accept the fact that you will do whatever you're going to do with those roosters once you get them to your property and they belong to you. So definitely ask around and see if there is anybody that has excess roosters, because then they've done all the growing for you and you only have to do the dispatch and the disassemble. So that's probably a really good way to go about it if you're new to this and you're not sure if it's for you. But otherwise, day olds is definitely the way to go. I don't know of anybody that sells meat birds when they're ready for processing. I know that Joel Salatin, in one of his books, Everything I Want to Do is Illegal, he talks about the fact that he went through some rigmarole as far as selling meat birds to customers, and technically he could not sell a butchered carcass of a meat bird to a customer because he wasn't a butcher and he wasn't a processing plant. He wasn't a commercial hatchery. And so he couldn't do it without these legal issues. Now, the way that he got around it, and it's very clever, is that he sold them the bird live. He would take orders before dispatch and he would say, I've sold you, that bird is yours. Now, would you like me to process it for you? At no extra cost. I sold you the bird. I'm processing birds for myself. Would you like me to process a bird for you as well? Very clever. They weren't paying for a butchered bird. They were paying for a live chicken, which is, of course, legal and completely kosher. So everybody was happy. Now, I'm not suggesting that you skirt legalities in that way, and it's definitely not legal advice, depending on what the regulations are in your area. But there are always ways of managing these things. If we ever go into it in a commercial kind of production setting, obviously, because I'm so vocal about it all, I'll probably have to go and do all the requirements and get set up as a butchery, get set up as a cool room and all that kind of stuff. So you have to play it by ear. Your circumstances may be different to mine. Your area may have different rules and requirements to mine. Go and look them up and do your research first. So that's it for today. I think I actually got through really quick, and it's probably because I didn't have the handy helper here to lighten the load a little bit. He's down the front checking on goats because we have had nothing but rain for the last 3 days and we needed it. The ground was so dry and so dusty, and the tank was, our 110,000 litre tank was probably down to about 20,000, 25,000 litres in it. It was definitely only about a quarter full. So this dump of rain that we've just had through southern New South Wales, I think northern New South Wales had it as well, has boosted the tanks up, boosted the dams up. And I am looking out the window and thinking we're going to have green grass growing like crazy everywhere. Anyway, I am also in the process of getting that dispatch and disassemble course sorted out and the book finished, but I have changed computer systems, which I was trying to change 2 weeks ago and it fell through, and I'm now in the process of changing it. So please bear with me if you're trying to get onto the web page and you can't get onto it. It won't be long and it'll be back up and running. I'm learning the technological stuff while I'm off with my knee. And let me tell you, I'd much rather be out in the paddock looking after chickens than trying to work out landing pages and funnels and things like that on the computer. It's doing my head in just a little bit. Anyway, that is it for me for this week. Next week, we're talking more about meat birds, so stay tuned for that one. And hopefully you are heading into December with everything set up to go for Christmas. We have already shopped for a lot of presents, me and the handy helper. And so we're hoping that Christmas is going to be very relaxed this year. Anyway, that's it for this week. I'll talk to you all next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. From all of us at Mojo Homestead, we really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, I ask just one small favour. Please subscribe and leave a review. Reviews help small podcasts like mine be more visible, so more people will know about us and be able to listen in. And don't forget to head over to www.mojohomestead.net/launch and check out our freebies. We love helping families start their homesteading journey. Remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.